In the heart of a bustling city filled with towering skyscrapers and endless traffic, there lived a woman named Victoria Langley. She was no ordinary woman. She was a sharp-tongued, quick-witted TV host who had carved out a niche for herself in the world of late-night television. Her show, Truth Unfiltered, wasn't just another talk show. It was a battleground where ideas clashed, beliefs were questioned, and egos often got bruised. Victoria's signature style was her ability to dismantle people's deeply held convictions with biting humor and relentless logic. Some called her fearless, others called her ruthless, but one thing was certain: she never shied away from controversy. Victoria's rise to fame had been meteoric. She started as a struggling journalist, writing opinion pieces that challenged societal norms. Her unapologetic tone caught the attention of network executives, and soon she found herself hosting her own program. Over the years, she became known for taking on guests whose beliefs she deemed irrational or outdated. Politicians, spiritual leaders, conspiracy theorists, you name it, she'd grilled them all. Her fans loved her for her razor-sharp intellect and her knack for exposing hypocrisy, while her critics accused her of being overly aggressive and dismissive. One day, as Victoria sat in her sleek office overlooking the glittering cityscape, she received a call from her producer, Mark. "We've got Keanu Reeves confirmed for next week," he said excitedly. Keanu Reeves, the actor famous not only for his roles in blockbuster movies like The Matrix and John Wick, but also for his humility and kindness. Unlike many Hollywood stars, Keanu had always kept a low profile, avoiding scandal and staying grounded despite his immense success. Recently, however, he had been making headlines for a different reason: his openness about his Buddhist faith and how it shaped his outlook on life. Mark explained that Keanu was promoting a new film, a deeply spiritual drama inspired by his personal journey. The movie explored themes of loss, redemption, and the search for meaning, which resonated with audiences around the world. For Victoria, this was the perfect setup. She saw an opportunity to challenge someone whose beliefs were rooted in something she fundamentally disagreed with. To her, religion was nothing more than a crutch, an excuse people used to avoid confronting the harsh realities of life. And here was Keanu Reeves, a global icon, espousing the very ideas she loved to debunk. Despite knowing Victoria's reputation, Keanu agreed to appear on the show. He viewed it as a chance to share his perspective, not to convert anyone, but to offer insight into how his faith had helped him navigate some of the darkest moments of his life. Keanu had faced unimaginable tragedies: the loss of his best friend River Phoenix, the death of his fiancée Jennifer Syme, and the stillbirth of their daughter Ava. Through it all, Buddhism had provided him with a framework for understanding suffering and finding peace amidst chaos. He believed that everyone could benefit from cultivating compassion and mindfulness, regardless of whether they identified as religious. As the day of the interview approached, excitement buzzed through the studio. Fans gathered outside, holding posters and chanting Keanu's name. Inside, crew members scrambled to ensure everything was perfect. Cameras were positioned strategically, lighting was adjusted to highlight the glimmer in Keanu's eyes, and microphones were double-checked for clarity. Meanwhile, Victoria prepared meticulously, jotting down notes and rehearsing her questions. She knew Keanu wouldn't be an easy target. He was intelligent, composed, and unlikely to lose his cool. But that only fueled her determination. This was going to be one of her most memorable episodes yet. When the night finally arrived, the studio was packed to capacity. The energy was electric as the audience waited eagerly for the two personalities to take the stage. When Keanu walked, out dressed casually in jeans and a leather jacket, the crowd erupted into cheers. He waved warmly, smiling with genuine gratitude. Victoria greeted him with a polite smile, though her eyes betrayed a hint of mischief. As they settled into their seats, the conversation began innocently enough. Victoria praised Keanu's latest film, asking about the inspiration behind it and how it connected to his personal experiences. Keanu responded thoughtfully, speaking about the importance of storytelling and exploring universal truths. But then, like a storm cloud rolling in, the tone shifted. Victoria steered the discussion toward Keanu's faith, probing him about why he chose to follow Buddhism. At first, her question seemed harmless, even curious, but as the minutes ticked by, her tone grew sharper, more pointed. She questioned whether believing in something beyond the material world was merely wishful thinking. She challenged the idea that meditation and prayer could solve real-world problems like poverty, inequality, and war. Each question was laced with skepticism, designed to unsettle. Keanu, however, remained unfazed. His calm demeanor never wavered, as he listened intently to each query. When he spoke, his words carried weight, reflecting years of introspection and wisdom. Yet Victoria pressed on, determined to push him into defending his beliefs against what she saw as undeniable logic. The tension in the room thickened, and the audience leaned forward, captivated by the unfolding drama. Little did anyone know, this confrontation would lead to something far greater than either Victoria or Keanu could have anticipated. The atmosphere in the studio shifted subtly as Victoria began to steer the conversation toward Keanu's faith. At first, her questions seemed innocent enough. Casual inquiries about how Buddhism influenced his daily life or whether it helped him stay grounded in the whirlwind of Hollywood fame. Keanu answered with characteristic humility, explaining that his practice of mindfulness and meditation allowed him to navigate challenges with clarity and patience. He spoke softly but confidently, his words carrying a quiet conviction that resonated with some members of the audience. But Victoria wasn't satisfied with surface-level answers. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing as she prepared to strike. "So," she said, her voice tinged with skepticism, "you're saying that meditating and following Buddhist teaching somehow makes you better equipped to handle real-world problems, like, I don't know, homelessness, hunger, or war?" Her tone was light, almost playful, but there was an edge to it, a challenge lurking beneath the surface. Keanu paused for a moment, considering her question carefully before responding. "It's not about solving everything instantly," he said. "Buddhism teaches us to approach suffering with compassion and understanding. It's more about changing ourselves so we can contribute positively to the world around us." His response was measured, thoughtful, and devoid of defensiveness. But Victoria wasn't ready to let him off the hook just yet. She raised an eyebrow, feigning curiosity. "Changing yourself sounds nice in theory," she countered. "But what good does that do when people are starving or dying because of systemic issues? Isn't praying or meditating just a way to avoid taking real action?" The audience murmured faintly, sensing the tension building between the two. Some nodded along with Victoria's point, while others looked uneasy, unsure where this line of questioning was headed. Keanu didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression calm but resolute. "Meditation isn't about avoiding action," he explained. "It's about cultivating awareness so you can act with intention. When we're mindful, we make better decisions, not just for ourselves, but for others too." He went on to share an example from his own life, describing how moments of reflection had guided him during difficult times, such as grieving the loss of loved ones or navigating career setbacks. His sincerity was palpable, and for a brief moment even Victoria seemed taken aback by the depth of his answer. But if anything, her resolve only hardened. Sensing an opening, she pressed further. "Let's talk about your personal tragedies." "Then," she said bluntly, her tone shifting from playful to pointed, "you've lost so much, your fiancé, your child, close friends. How has your faith helped you deal with all of that? Or is it just another way to cope with pain you can't control?" The room fell silent. Even the crew behind the cameras exchanged uneasy glances. This was uncharted territory, and everyone could feel the weight of the moment. For the first time since the interview began, Keanu hesitated, not because he was caught off guard, but because he understood the gravity of what Victoria was asking. He took a deep breath, his gaze steady as he chose his words carefully. "Losing someone you love is indescribable," he started, his voice softer now, tinged with emotion. "There's no magic solution, no perfect answer. What faith gives me is a way to process that grief, to sit with it, acknowledge it, and find meaning in it. It doesn't erase the pain, but it helps me carry it. Victoria tilted her head slightly, clearly unsatisfied. Meaning? She echoed, her tone dripping with sarcasm. What kind of meaning can you possibly find in losing someone you were supposed to spend your life with? Doesn't that just highlight how random and unfair life is? Where's the higher power in all of this? Her words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and oppressive. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to applaud her boldness or cringe at her audacity. Keanu, however, remained composed. There was no anger in his eyes, no frustration, only a deep sadness mixed with understanding. He knew Victoria wasn't attacking him personally. She was grappling with something far bigger than either of them. I don't believe in a higher power in the traditional sense, he clarified gently. To me, faith is about connection, with yourself, with others, with the world. It's about recognizing that life is fragile and precious, and that we have a responsibility to care for one another. That's the meaning I've found, not in spite of loss, but because of it. Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but something in Keanu's demeanor stopped her. For a split second, she saw beyond the polished exterior of the Hollywood star sitting across from her. She saw a man who had endured unimaginable pain and emerged not bitter or broken, but stronger and more compassionate. It was unsettling, almost disarming, and it threw her off balance. Determined to regain control, she fired off another question, this time aiming straight for the heart of the matter. Okay, fine. Let's say I buy into this whole mindfulness thing. How does that translate into actual change? You're rich, famous, successful. You live a completely different reality than most people. Can someone struggling to put food on the table really afford to sit around meditating? The room erupted into murmurs again, louder this time. Some viewers at home might have cheered Victoria on, appreciating her relentless pursuit of logic over sentimentality. Others might have winced, feeling that she'd crossed a line. Either way, the tension was undeniable. Keanu met her gaze squarely, his expression unwavering. You're right, he admitted. Not everyone has the luxury of time or resources to focus on self-reflection. But mindfulness doesn't require wealth or privilege. It's accessible to anyone willing to try. And yes, I've been fortunate in many ways, but that doesn't mean my struggles aren't real. Faith isn't about escaping hardship, it's about finding strength to face it. His words struck a chord with several members of the audience, who nodded in agreement. Even Victoria seemed momentarily thrown by his calm persistence. She had expected him to retreat under pressure, to become defensive or evasive, but instead he stood firm, meeting every challenge with grace and wisdom. Realizing she needed to up the ante, Victoria delivered what she thought would be the final blow. With a smirk, she leaned forward and asked, So, Keanu, tell me this. Do you honestly believe that praying or meditating will solve global crises like poverty and war? Because if that's your solution, it sounds awfully naive to me. The question landed like a punch, sharp and direct. The audience held its collective breath, waiting to see how Keanu would respond. Would he falter? Would he lash out? Or would he rise above as he had done throughout the interview? What happened next would leave everyone, including Victoria, speechless. As Victoria's pointed question hung in the air, the studio seemed to grow quieter than ever. The audience sat frozen, their eyes darting between the two figures on stage, Victoria, with her confident smirk, and Keanu, who appeared unfazed despite the weight of her words. For a moment it felt as though time itself had paused, giving everyone a chance to absorb the gravity of what had just been said. Keanu didn't rush to respond. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate breath, his gaze steady and thoughtful. Then, in a voice that was calm yet firm, he began to speak. You're asking me if prayer or meditation can solve global crises like poverty and war, he said, repeating her question almost verbatim. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think anyone believes they're a magic fix for problems that complex. His answer surprised both Victoria and the audience. It wasn't defensive or evasive. Instead, it was disarmingly straightforward. Sensing an opening, Keanu continued, leaning forward slightly as if to bridge the gap between them. What faith and mindfulness offer isn't a solution, it's a starting point. They teach us how to see the world differently, to recognize suffering not as something distant or abstract but as something personal, something we all share. Victoria raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. That sounds nice in theory, she interjected, her tone laced with sarcasm. But how does seeing suffering differently actually help anyone? Isn't that just another way of saying, think positive thoughts and everything will work out? Keanu shook his head gently, his expression unwavering. No, it's not about thinking positive thoughts, he clarified. It's about taking responsibility for ourselves, for each other, for the choices we make every day. When we cultivate compassion, we start to act differently. We treat people with kindness instead of judgment. We listen instead of arguing. And sometimes those small actions add up to big changes. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. Take my own life, for example. I've lost loved ones, faced failures, struggled with pain that felt unbearable at times. Faith didn't make those things disappear, but it gave me tools to cope, to keep moving forward without losing sight of what matters most. Connection. Whether it's connecting with family, friends, strangers, or even myself, that sense of belonging has kept me grounded. By now, the audience was completely captivated. Some were nodding along while others scribbled notes furiously, trying to capture every word. Even Victoria seemed momentarily disarmed, though she quickly masked her reaction with a tight smile. Determined to regain control, she fired back with another question. All right, let's say I agree with you. That compassion and connection are important. How does that translate into action? Aren't you just talking about feeling good while the rest of the world burns? Keanu didn't hesitate. Compassion isn't just a feeling, he replied. It's a call to action. If you truly care about someone, you don't sit back and watch them suffer. You do something about it. You lend a hand, however small. Maybe it's volunteering at a shelter. Maybe it's donating to a cause you believe in. Or maybe it's simply being present for someone who needs support. Every little bit counts. Victoria crossed her arms, still unconvinced. But doesn't that put the burden on individuals rather than addressing systemic issues? Shouldn't governments and corporations be doing more? Absolutely, Keanu agreed without missing a beat. Systemic change is crucial, and holding institutions accountable is part of the process. But individual actions matter too. Think about it this way. Systems are made up of people. If enough people commit to acting with empathy and integrity, those values ripple outward. Change starts with us, with how we choose to live our lives. 4. The first time during the interview, Victoria looked genuinely conflicted. She had anticipated a battle of ideologies, a clash between logic and emotion, but Keanu's responses defied her expectations. He wasn't rejecting reason. He was integrating it with heart. His answers weren't platitudes or vague generalizations. They were rooted in real-life experiences and tangible examples. Before she could formulate another rebuttal, something unexpected happened. A producer approached her discreetly, whispering urgently into her ear. Her brow furrowed as she listened, her expression shifting from irritation to confusion. After a brief exchange, she turned back to Keanu, visibly flustered. "There's something I need to bring up," she announced abruptly, breaking the flow of the conversation. "We've just received information that your charity foundation is funding a major initiative to combat homelessness right here in the city. Is that true?" The question caught Keanu off guard, though he recovered quickly. "Yes, it's true," he confirmed with a modest shrug. "Our foundation partners with local organizations to provide job training, mental health services, and housing assistance. It's one small step toward addressing a much larger problem." Victoria stared at him, momentarily speechless. This revelation threw her entire line of questioning into disarray. Here she was, accusing him of espousing empty ideals, while behind the scenes, he was quietly working to create real-world impact. The irony wasn't lost on her, or the audience. "So why haven't you talked about this publicly?" she asked, her voice tinged with frustration. "If you're doing such great work, why keep it under wraps?" Keanu smiled faintly, his demeanor as humble as ever. Because it's not about me, he said simply. The focus should always be on the people we're trying to help, not the person helping them. Besides, I don't do this for recognition. I do it because it's the right thing to do. His response left Victoria struggling to find her footing. For years, she had prided herself on exposing hypocrisy and challenging empty rhetoric. Yet here was Keanu Reeves, a man whose actions aligned perfectly with his words. There was no contradiction, no hidden agenda. Just quiet dedication to making the world a better place. As the reality of the situation sank in, Victoria found herself grappling with emotions she hadn't expected to feel. Admiration, humility, and perhaps even a hint of envy. She had walked into the interview ready to dismantle his beliefs, but instead, she was confronted with a truth far more compelling than any argument she could muster. For the first time in her career, Victoria Langley was speechless, and the audience couldn't wait to see what would happen next. The revelation about Keanu's charity work hung in the air like a thunderclap, leaving Victoria visibly shaken. Her usually sharp and composed demeanor faltered as she tried to process what she had just learned. The audience, too, was buzzing, with quiet murmurs, their admiration for Keanu growing by the second. For many watching at home or in the studio, this twist felt like a plot straight out of one of his movies. Unexpected, inspiring, and deeply human. Victoria cleared her throat, attempting to regain control of the conversation. So, let me get this straight, she began, her tone less confrontational now, almost hesitant. You've been quietly funding programs to help people struggling with homelessness, job training, mental health support, housing assistance, and yet you never mentioned it publicly. Not even during interviews where you could have used it to, I don't know, boost your image? Keanu nodded, his expression calm and unassuming. That's right, he said simply. I didn't want the focus to be on me. It's not my story, it's theirs. The people we're helping deserve the spotlight, not someone who writes a check. His humility struck a chord with everyone present. Even Victoria, who prided herself on being immune to sentimentality, found herself momentarily disarmed. She glanced down at her notes, realizing that her carefully crafted questions suddenly seemed irrelevant, or worse, petty. How do you criticize someone whose actions so clearly align with their beliefs? But Victoria wasn't ready to concede just yet. She squared her shoulders, trying to steer the conversation back to firmer ground. All right, fair enough, she said, forcing a smile. But doesn't that raise another question? Why stay so private about your philanthropy if raising awareness could bring more attention, and potentially more resources, to these causes? Keanu leaned back slightly. In his chair, his body language relaxed but attentive. He thought for a moment before responding. It's not about secrecy, it's about intention, he explained. When you attach your name to something, it changes the narrative. People start talking about you instead of the issue. And honestly, I don't think anyone should care about me. What matters is whether we're making a difference in people's lives. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable, and it resonated deeply with the audience. Some viewers at home took to social media immediately, sharing clips of the interview and praising Keanu's selflessness. Others turned to friends or family members, marveling at how effortlessly he deflected praise and redirected attention to the real heroes, the volunteers, organizers, and individuals working tirelessly to combat homelessness. Back in the studio, Victoria struggled to maintain her composure. This wasn't how the interview was supposed to go. She had planned to expose contradictions in Keanu's worldview, to highlight the perceived gap between faith and action. Instead, she found herself face to face with someone whose life was a testament to the very principles he preached. It was humbling and infuriating all at once. Determined to salvage the situation, she decided to pivot. Okay, fine, she said, her tone softening slightly. Let's talk about the bigger picture then. You've talked a lot about compassion and mindfulness, but how do you respond to critics who say religion, or spirituality in your case, is just a distraction from addressing systemic problems? That focusing on individual kindness lets governments and corporations off the hook? Keanu nodded, acknowledging the validity of her point. That's a fair criticism, he admitted. Systemic issues require systemic solutions. They can't be solved by goodwill alone, but here's the thing. Change starts with individuals. If enough people commit to living with empathy and integrity, those values influence institutions. Think about history. Every major movement for justice began with ordinary people deciding they wouldn't stand idly by anymore. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. Mindfulness gives us the clarity to see what needs to be done and the courage to take the first step. It doesn't replace activism or policy reform. It complements them. Both are necessary. Victoria listened intently, her earlier bravado giving way to genuine curiosity. She realized that Keanu wasn't dismissing the importance of structural change. He was emphasizing the role of personal responsibility within that framework. His perspective wasn't naive. It was nuanced, layered, and rooted in practicality. Still, there was one last question nagging at her, one that went beyond the scope of the interview but felt impossible to ignore. Taking a deep breath, she leaned forward, her expression softer than before. "Keanu," she said, her voice quieter now, almost vulnerable. "Why do you think people like me, people who are skeptical of faith, react so strongly against ideas like yours? Is it fear? Anger? Something else?" The question caught Keanu off guard, but only for a moment. He smiled gently, sensing the shift in the dynamic between them. "I think it depends on the person," he replied. "For some, skepticism comes from a place of logic. They need evidence before they believe anything. For others, it might stem from pain or disappointment. Maybe they've been hurt by organized religion or seen hypocrisy up close. Or maybe they're just searching for answers that feel real to them." He paused, his gaze locking onto hers. "Faith isn't about having all the answers," he continued. "It's about trusting that you'll find your way even when things don't make sense. It's okay to doubt, to question, to seek. In fact, that's part of the journey." His words struck a nerve, not just with Victoria, but with countless viewers tuning in from around the world. Many had walked away from faith after experiencing loss or betrayal. Others had rejected it outright, viewing it as incompatible with science or reason. Yet here was Keanu, offering a different perspective, one that embraced uncertainty without demanding blind acceptance. For Victoria, the moment was transformative. As she sat there, staring into Keanu's compassionate eyes, she felt the walls she had built around herself begin to crack. All those years of mocking belief systems, of ridiculing faith as weakness, it wasn't just about proving a point. It was about protecting herself from something deeper, something she hadn't fully confronted until now. Her producer's voice crackled through her earpiece, reminding her they were running out of time. Reluctantly, she brought the interview to a close, thanking Keanu for his candor and insight. The audience erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the studio like waves crashing against a shore. As Keanu stood up to leave, he extended his hand toward Victoria, who hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking it. There was no animosity in the gesture, only mutual respect. And as the cameras cut to commercial break, neither of them realized how profoundly this encounter would change the course of their lives. What unfolded next, a ripple effect of growth, reflection, and redemption, would become the stuff of legend, proving that sometimes the most unexpected moments lead to the greatest transformations. As the applause from the audience began to die down, Victoria sat quietly in her chair, her mind racing. The interview had taken a turn she hadn't anticipated, one that left her feeling exposed and vulnerable in ways she hadn't experienced in years. Keanu's words echoed in her head, not as an argument to be dissected, but as a mirror reflecting parts of herself she had long buried. For the first time in her career, she wasn't thinking about the next question or the clever rebuttal. She was grappling with emotions she couldn't quite name. Keanu, sensing the shift in the room, lingered for a moment before heading backstage. He could see the flicker of something unspoken in Victoria's eyes, something raw and fragile. Instead of walking away, he turned back toward her and asked gently, Victoria, can I ask you something? The question caught her off guard. She looked up startled, her usual sharpness replaced by uncertainty. Sure, she replied hesitantly, unsure of what was coming next. Why does faith or spirituality bother you so much? Keanu asked, his tone devoid of judgment. What makes you fight against it so hard? For a moment, Victoria froze. This wasn't part of the script. Her job was to ask the tough questions, not answer them. But there was something disarming about Keanu's sincerity, his willingness to listen without pressing for answers. Slowly, she exhaled, her shoulders slumping slightly as if releasing a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. It's complicated, she stammered, her voice quieter than usual. The audience leaned forward, captivated by this rare glimpse of vulnerability from the woman who had built her reputation on being unshakable. Even the crew behind the cameras exchanged glances, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. After a pause, Victoria continued, her words tumbling out faster now. When I was younger, my little brother, he got sick, cancer. We did everything we could to save him, doctors, treatments, prayers, you name it. Everyone told us to have faith, to believe that things would work out. But they didn't. Her voice cracked and she paused to steady herself. He died when he was 12. And after that, I just couldn't understand how anyone could still believe in something bigger than themselves. It felt like a lie, a way to avoid facing the truth. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy yet sacred. No one moved, no one spoke. All eyes were on Victoria, whose carefully constructed walls had crumbled in front of millions of viewers. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't try to hide them. For once, she wasn't performing for the camera. She was simply speaking from the heart. Keanu listened intently, his expression soft and empathetic. When she finished, he nodded slowly as if acknowledging the depth of her pain. I'm so sorry you went through that, he said quietly. Losing someone you love, it changes you, makes you question everything. Victoria wiped her cheek, with the back of her hand nodding faintly. Yeah, she whispered. It made me angry. At God, at religion, at people who act like faith can fix anything. Because it doesn't. It didn't. You're right, Keanu agreed, surprising her. Faith doesn't bring people back. It doesn't erase pain or make the world fair. But it can help you carry the weight of those losses, not by ignoring them, but by giving you a way to process them, to find meaning even in the hardest moments. I meant, words resonated deeply, striking a chord she hadn't known existed. Meaning? She echoed, her voice tinged with skepticism, but also curiosity. How do you find meaning in something like that? How do you forgive the universe? Or whatever, higher power for taking someone away? Keanu smiled faintly, his gaze steady. You don't have to forgive anything or anyone. Faith isn't about absolving the universe of its flaws. It's about finding strength within yourself to keep going, to honor the people you've lost by living fully, loving deeply, and doing what you can to make the world a little better. That's what keeps me moving forward anyway. Victoria stared at him, her defenses crumbling further with each passing second. She had entered the interview determined to expose hypocrisy, to prove that faith was nothing more than wishful thinking. But sitting across from her was a man who embodied the very principles he spoke about: humility, compassion, resilience. His presence was a living testament to the power of belief, not as a shield against reality, but as a source of courage in the face of it. I never thought of it that way, she admitted softly, almost to herself. I always saw faith as escapism, a way to avoid dealing with the messiness of life. But maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's about leaning into the messiness, finding beauty even when it hurts. Keanu nodded, his smile warm and encouraging. That's exactly it. Life is messy, unpredictable, unfair sometimes, but it's also beautiful, fleeting, precious. Faith helps me hold both truths at the same time, to grieve without losing hope, to question without giving up. The audience erupted into applause again, though this time it felt different. It wasn't the polite clapping of spectators watching a performance. It was the heartfelt response of people witnessing something real and transformative. Social media lit up with reactions as viewers shared their own stories of loss, doubt, and healing. Some praised Keanu for his wisdom and grace, while others expressed gratitude for Victoria's honesty, saying her vulnerability reminded them that they weren't alone in their struggles. As the show wrapped up, Victoria thanked Keanu once more, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you," she said simply, her words carrying layers of meaning, "for coming here tonight, and for sharing your perspective. I think I needed to hear it." Keanu smiled warmly, extending his hand again. "Thank you for being brave enough to share yours," he replied. "That takes real strength." Their handshake lingered for a moment longer than necessary, a silent acknowledgement of the connection they had forged. As Keanu walked off stage, the crowd cheered, but Victoria remained seated, lost in thought. Her producer approached cautiously, reminding her they needed to wrap up the segment. But she barely heard him. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying the conversation over and over, searching for answers she hadn't dared to seek before. Later that night, unable to sleep, Victoria sat alone in her apartment, staring out the window at the city lights below. For years she had prided herself on being fearless, on confronting difficult topics head-on. Yet tonight she realized she had been running from something far more daunting: her own grief. By ridiculing faith, she had been trying to protect herself from the pain of unanswered prayers, from the emptiness left behind when her brother passed away. But Keanu's words had planted a seed of hope, a reminder that faith wasn't about certainty or control. It was about surrendering to the unknown, trusting that even in darkness there was light to be found. For the first time in years, Victoria allowed herself to sit with her emotions instead of pushing them away. She cried, laughed, and eventually prayed, not because she believed anyone was listening, but because it felt right. In the weeks that followed, subtle changes began to emerge in Victoria's approach to her show. While she remained committed to challenging ideas and holding people accountable, she started incorporating discussions about empathy, mental health, and personal growth. She invited guests who represented diverse perspectives, encouraging open dialogue rather than debate. Viewers noticed the shift, praising her for creating a space where authenticity thrived. As for Keanu, he returned to his quiet, purposeful life content, knowing he had made a difference, even if only for one person. The encounter became a turning point for both of them, proof that sometimes the most unexpected conversations lead to the greatest transformations. And though their paths might never cross again, the ripple effects of their meeting would continue to spread, touching lives far beyond the confines of that studio. In the days and weeks following the interview, the ripple effects of that unforgettable night began to spread far beyond the confines of the studio. Social media was ablaze with reactions, tweets, posts, videos, and memes capturing moments from the exchange between Victoria Langley and Keanu Reeves. Viewers couldn't stop talking about it. Some praised Victoria for showing vulnerability, a side of her they had never seen before. Others lauded Keanu for his wisdom, humility, and ability to inspire without preaching. The conversation wasn't just limited to their interaction. It sparked broader discussions about faith, grief, compassion, and the human condition. For Victoria, the aftermath was transformative. Initially, she felt exposed, as though she had stripped away layers of armor she had worn for years. But instead of judgment or ridicule, she received an outpouring of support. Messages poured in from fans and strangers alike, many sharing their own stories of loss, doubt, and spiritual questioning. One viewer wrote, "I've always admired your sharp mind, but seeing you open up like that reminded me it's okay to be vulnerable. Thank you for reminding us we're all human." Another commented, "Your honesty gave me permission to confront my own pain. I lost my sister years ago and buried those feelings deep inside. Watching you talk about your brother made me realize I'm not alone." Encouraged by these responses, Victoria decided to use her platform differently. She began hosting segments called Unfiltered Reflections, where she invited guests not just to debate ideas but to share their personal journeys, their struggles, triumphs, and lessons learned along the way. Topics ranged from mental health awareness to overcoming adversity, from finding purpose after tragedy, to exploring unconventional paths to happiness. Her tone softened, becoming less combative and more empathetic. It wasn't a complete overhaul of her show. It still retained its edge. But it became a space for connection rather than confrontation. One episode featured a panel of bereaved parents discussing how they coped with unimaginable loss. Another showcased activists working tirelessly to address systemic issues like poverty and climate change. Yet another highlighted everyday heroes, teachers, nurses, volunteers, who quietly dedicated their lives to helping others. Each segment resonated deeply with viewers, who appreciated the authenticity and heart behind the conversations. Critics who once dismissed Victoria as overly cynical now saw her in a new light, as someone willing to evolve, to grow, and to embrace complexity. Meanwhile, Keanu returned to his quiet life, avoiding the spotlight as much as possible. He didn't seek recognition for what had happened during the interview, nor did he view it as a victory over skepticism. To him, it was simply a moment of connection, a chance to share his perspective and perhaps offer comfort to someone in need. Still, the impact of that night followed him in subtle ways. Fans approached him on the street, not just to praise his movies, but to thank him for his words. "You helped me see faith differently," one woman told him at a coffee shop. "I thought it was about answers, but now I understand it's about asking the right questions." Keanu smiled warmly, nodding in acknowledgement. "Faith isn't mine to give or take," he replied. "It's something each person has to find for themselves. I'm just glad my story could be part of your journey." Back in the world of television, Victoria continued to evolve both personally and professionally. She started attending therapy sessions, confronting the grief she had buried for so long, talking openly about her brother's death, and the anger and confusion it left behind. Wasn't easy, but it brought her a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. She realized that while faith might not be her path, there was value in understanding why it mattered to others. Compassion, she discovered, transcended belief systems. It was universal. Her newfound perspective also influenced the direction of her career. After months of reflection, Victoria announced that she would be launching a new series titled Truth and Connection. Unlike her previous show, which thrived on controversy, this one focused on fostering empathy and understanding. Each episode explored themes of resilience, kindness, and the power of community, featuring interviews with people from all walks of life. From survivors of natural disasters to artists using creativity as a form of healing, every story reinforced the idea that despite our differences, we are bound together by shared experiences. The premiere of Truth and Connection drew record-breaking viewership, with audiences praising its heartfelt approach. Critics hailed it as a bold reinvention, noting how Victoria had managed to retain her sharp intellect while embracing emotional depth. "This isn't just a makeover," one reviewer wrote. "It's a metamorphosis, a testament to the fact that growth is possible, even when you least expect it." As for Keanu, he remained largely unchanged in his day-to-day life. He continued supporting charitable initiatives quietly, focusing on making tangible differences rather than seeking accolades. His foundation expanded its efforts, partnering with organizations addressing education inequality, environmental sustainability, and healthcare access. Though he occasionally appeared in interviews or public events, he always steered the conversation toward the causes he cared about, deflecting attention from himself. Despite their vastly different lives, Victoria and Keanu stayed loosely connected. They exchanged occasional emails, checking in on each other and sharing updates about their respective projects. During one such exchange, Victoria confessed, "That night changed me in ways I didn't think were possible. I don't know if I'll ever fully believe in faith the way you do, but I've learned to respect it and to see the good it can bring." Keanu responded with characteristic humility. "Change doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't have to look the same for everyone. What matters is that you're moving forward, with courage, with curiosity, and with an open heart." Years Later, when reflecting on the legacy of that fateful interview, people remembered it not just for its drama, but for its humanity. It served as a reminder that even in moments of conflict, there is potential for understanding. That vulnerability isn't weakness, it's strength. And that sometimes the most profound transformations begin with a simple question. Why? The encounter between Victoria Langley and Keanu Reeves became more than just a chapter in their lives. It became a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of dialogue, empathy, and the willingness to listen. In a world often divided by beliefs and ideologies, their story showed that bridges can be built, even across seemingly insurmountable gaps. And in doing so, it inspired countless others to embark on their own journeys of self-discovery, compassion, and growth.